All right, well, so we got another one here with Steven, and writing advice about swearing and adult language. Now, I did a video on TikTok where I labeled it as don't use this F word. And that's also how the video started. And a lot of people in the comments were like, LOL, I thought you were going to tell me I couldn't use the F word and how dare you kind of thing. But I like this video. And it turned out I was talking about the words of feel and felt. So I'm interested in hearing about his advice on swearing and adult language. Let's go.
Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name's Stephen. Today I'm doing another Beyond the Page. This is where I'm talking about an aspect of writing, something to study, to dig into a little and look at how it can be useful, how it's used in different ways, and if I want to apply it to my work and maybe you want to apply it to yours. So today I'm talking about swearing, adult language. My favourite swear words are, I'm not going to list them, there's too many. I like swearing, I think it can be useful, I think it's realistic, but let's get into that. So the first point to talk about is swearing where it's appropriate. So for example, in my books and other books, fantasy books, there are soldiers. These are ordinary guys who are on the front lines, and having met real life soldiers, I know that they swear quite a lot when they're in front of their officers, where they're on patrol, when they're in front of their commanders. Obviously they don't swear, they can't in the armed forces because it's not appropriate, but when they're just joking around and messing around, they swear a lot, and it's just part of how they are. So I brought that into my frontline warriors in my books, and lots of other people have too, because it's appropriate and it makes it feel realistic. Another example I spoke about in a previous Beyond the Page was Jonathan French's books. He has some characters in his series that are half orcs, and because of the way they are raised, because of their background, because of the kind of life that they live, swearing is quite appropriate. They're sort of equivalents of biker gangs, like if you think about a show like Sons of Anarchy. They're a distant relative, shall we say, of characters like that. They're probably going to swear quite a lot because they have a very rough lifestyle, and so it's appropriate to the situation in which the character finds themselves. Now, if your character was a priest and all of the characters were priests, I probably wouldn't find many of them swearing because it's not appropriate. It wouldn't feel realistic, and just putting swearing in there for the sake of it would just seem...
Don't do it.
Hey! Get down on the ground!
Okay.
Oh, shit, bro.
Any more friends back there?
Run.
That's not how you clear corners, buddy. Oh, he saw him. Yeah, I've wanted to see this movie for a long time. Never had the time to do it.
seem a bit ridiculous and a bit out of place, like the author was doing it for their own amusement. But if it brings you out of the story, then it's not working and it shouldn't be there. The other aspect of swearing is, of course, it's historical. If you dig back into the history of how our English language developed, you'll find that certain words weren't used before a certain period of time because they weren't part of the common parlance. So whenever you create a world, fantasy or other, you tend to take a lot of stuff with you without thinking about it. Like people in the street in a fantasy world, they usually tend to eat chicken, beef, pork, whatever it might be. They don't have weird other animals because it's just a bit easier. It makes more sense, and also it's another barrier that the reader doesn't have to overcome. So some people take that approach with swearing. They just take their favourite swear words and put them into the book where appropriate. But some people could argue and say, well, within your fantasy world, language wouldn't have developed the same based upon the history, therefore the swear words aren't appropriate. You can argue that point if you want. You can change the swearing to something else if you want. It's really up to what you feel comfortable doing. As someone who likes swearing, I think sometimes there can be too much. If an author has put it in there for their own amusement or for titillation, then there again it can be another barrier, and it just feels like it's there for...
It feels juvenile, to be honest. Like whenever I read a book that has too much swearing, it feels juvenile, but like they thought that would make them seem like an adult. They think this is how adults are, you know, but they don't really know, so that's why they just swear all the time. But it's like, I think that I cuss a lot. But sometimes I read books where it's like, no one, and I mean no one, cusses this much. So it just becomes juvenile, like some kid who doesn't really know what it's like to be an adult, but they think this is what it's like. So, yeah.
No particular.
And also, I would note on the idea of like, their language wouldn't have evolved the same way because it's different or whatever, different society. That is a thread that you might not want to pull on. Because the way that I look at it is just simply that we, as the author, as the storyteller, are telling the story in English, right? Or whatever given language you're using here on Earth. I'm going to be using English. I'm telling you the story in English. Now, since this is a fantasy world way somewhere on the other side of the galaxy, or it never existed because it's a fantasy book, they're not speaking English. Okay? Let's just be real. They're not speaking English. But I'm translating for you in English. So while they would have had some sort of for instance, this isn't even a cuss word, but the champagne, right? I don't know if we all know this, but champagne is called champagne because it was originated in a region of France called a Champagne region, or the Champagne Hills or something like that, whatever it was. And so only true champagne comes from this Champagne region, okay? And it's very expensive. And so then it's like, okay, so then can I never have champagne? Do my people just never make they have wine? They have who made wine in our world? And since my world didn't have that, do they make wine? Does my world even have grapes? Right? Well, they have something similar to grapes. Okay, well, would they be as obsessed as we are in fermenting fruits and making alcohol? Would they be doing the same thing? Right? Because they didn't grow up on our world, so it's different, right? See, the idea of having this the words wouldn't have come the same. Well, you have to apply that kind of logic to everything, right? You have to apply that kind of logic to everything at that point. And then you start spiraling out of control, okay? So I think that certain common phrases, it's okay to take those out and be like, well, this phrase came from this thing, so it's very specific. It's more specific than just calling it champagne kind of thing, right? Champagne is just a region that it originally came from. So to them, they have the same thing where their sparkly wine came from a region and it was called something else, but to make it easier for the reader, it's basically it is champagne. You know it is champagne. They would technically be calling it whatever the region is over in Fantasyland, okay? But when it comes to phrases such as I don't know, like picnic, right? Picnic came from a very particular thing, right? Which now that I've stepped in that bear trap, I can't really say what it was, but it was pick a, and then it was that slave auctions, right? So that's one of those things where you might not use picnic because is that terminology really in your world? Right? I don't know, right? It's one of those things where you might decide to refrain from using certain things, and just that's okay. It's okay to refrain from using certain key phrases that, yeah, sure, they might have a similar saying in their world, but again, it's a fantasy world. Sure, we'll just go with it, right? We'll just do whatever we need to do. We're the author. We control everything about this, right? And as long as the dialogue serves the plot, it's fine. But I just don't like that excuse of the language wouldn't have developed the same. It's like, well, of course not. They're not speaking English. I'm translating for you.
Particular reason. I know some people have a very strong opinion about swearing. They just don't like it. They don't like any in their books at all. And even a little bit of swearing can put them off. But you can't try and please everybody all of the time. So you have to just go with what's comfortable to you. But putting loads in just for the sake of it, because you think it might be cool or edgy, there again, it's just not a good idea, and I wouldn't do it. If someone hits their thumb with a hammer, they're probably going to swear or say something really unpleasant because it really hurts, and it's an instinctive sort of thing, and that's appropriate. If you're not sure about the level...
Now that's one of those things too where I would say, like, for instance, like, gosh darn it, right? That was people covering up the swearing of god damn it, because they didn't want to say that. So I do think that if you're going to have some of those things that are clearly cover-ups, right? Like, oh man, that freaking hurt, right? Like that kind of stuff. That kind of, I mean, typically to me, that signals to me that the word that it was, that it's intentionally covering up, that word exists. It's just not being used, but it does exist.
Of swearing in your book, I would suggest getting someone else to read it. Friends or family, someone that you trust, and get them to focus on this particular aspect and say, is it right for the situation? Does it feel comfortable to them? Now, admittedly, some people have different levels of comfort to do with swearing, so I'd get opinion from a few different people, because some will just say, I just don't like any swearing, and they'll want to remove it all, and that's not much use to you. If it's relevant, if it's appropriate for the situation, then include it. But sometimes you can just kind of go overboard and you don't really realize you're doing it, and then you can kind of pare it back. Your book will be edited by lots of other people anyway, whether you're traditionally published or self-published, and an editor will probably comment on this too, given the situation, given the character, given the world. So that's something else that they might ask you to look at. But if you can look at it yourself and get other opinions from other people that you trust, that can be useful too. The next aspect to do with swearing is it relevant and is it useful? So let's say you've set a science fiction novel and it's in a world that's populated by asexual lizard beings. A lot of swearing that we use is very much to do with gender and genitalia. So if you're in a sci-fi world and they're all asexual, then that's not relevant, it's not appropriate, and it doesn't fit within that world. So how would they swear? What would they do? What would they say? Some writers, for their own personal reasons, whether it's religious, whether it's just they don't like it, choose not to have any swearing in any of their books at all. I know that Brandon Sanderson, who's a science fiction and fantasy writer, and Brian McClellan are both Mormons, and they don't want to have any normal swearing in their books, so they don't have any at all. But what they have done is they created some within their own world. So rather than have people blast...
Which I think is cheating. I honestly think that that's cheating. Like, so basically, like, if you make up a swear word that in your mind, as the author, in your mind, you're probably going to equate that to something else, or at least like know like what level it's on, right? So like in our world, we would say something like, you know, I hope you burn in hell, right? Like that, right? That'd be like an insult, and technically that's kind of like a swear to a certain degree, right? Or damn you to hell, right? That too, right? My world doesn't have hell, right? There's no heaven, hell there, right? They don't have those labels. They have different labels, and one of them is the pit, right? The pit is basically the abyss. It's like an endless void of existence. Okay, and so that's kind of like their hell, is this endless void of existence. And so they say, you know, this thing is pit spawned. Right, this is all going to go to the pit, that kind of stuff, right? So I have an equation, I have a direct line to that curse word, right? To words that are, I mainly just use straight English. I don't really make up words because it doesn't really make that much sense exactly. Very rare cases do I ever do that kind of stuff. But I'll give one here, is that in the the Order, which is my main character, is a monk of the Order. The Order is basically these monks who become living weapons, and they refer to themselves as weapons, right? People who are not weapons, who are basically like they're not dangerous, let's say, or they're being stupid, right? That'd be like another kind of like a version of like, man, this guy's being stupid. He's kind of being like, he's being like difficult to deal with, that kind of thing. They might call him a tool, right? Now we kind of have that same version to a certain degree in our world, like, oh man, this guy's a total tool. But in their version of it, calling someone a tool is a deeper insult because you're not a weapon, right? Especially if you're talking to someone who is another monk, right? So this is a thing that they say even when they're younger, still in the monastery, cut off from the outside world. That's where it came up from, right? You're not a weapon, you're a tool, right? And that's a deeper insult because their whole life is meant to be moving towards becoming a weapon, right? So calling someone a tool to them is a deeper insult than just calling someone a tool here. Like calling someone a tool here is like, man, what a dumbass. Calling someone a tool over there, yeah, you might do it as a dumbass kind of thing, but also it's like it's just a deeper cut, right? So understanding where these insults and these curse words, like what level they're on. If you have an author who is making them up, sure, it can make sense because of like the way the world works and like the way that the circumstances in which that insult or curse word arose. But you as the author, and also you as the reader, you could probably get a sense of like, that's like someone saying shit, right? It's like, oh shit, versus the F word is a harder word, right? I mean, there's more weight implied on that word. So if you're making words up and you're like, I don't want to have any curse words because I'm Mormon, or for any other religion, you're like, I don't want to have any curse words because of this religious belief. Why are you then making up curse words knowing that they're curse words? You just made, I mean, yeah, sure, they're not curse words here on earth, but they are curse words in your mind. And that's where everything revolves around. It's in your mind and your heart, right? Especially if you are a Mormon and you believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ, then you should be understanding that everything in your mind and your heart are what matters. Okay? So I don't like necessarily blame them for trying this, but I also think that it's technically cheating. It's technically like it's not sufficient in a sense. Like if you don't want to have curse words, don't have them and don't make them up, because otherwise you still have curse words.
Blasphemy in the traditional way. Let's say in their world there's a character called Bev. Someone might say, oh, for Bev's sake, and
Switch and save $652.
That's a whole ass pie right there, man. You haven't had any of it.
there again, it's appropriate to that character, to that world. Other people make up other words and just fit them in within the world that they've created to create some kind of swearing or blasphemy or just something that someone would say when they're angry. And that's down to the author's personal belief system,
yeah, someone had
or their own
balls.
personal...
Was it? Kind of forgetting which book series it was in. It could have been in the Malazan series, or it might have been in Wheel of Time. But one of those books was like, they would say balls, or they would say like Reaper's balls. And that was a curse. That was a curse word. And so again, it's one of those things where even though you're not really saying an exact curse word, you've just made up a curse word, so it's still cursing.
Personal comfort level. So this allows characters to rant and rave and get angry like anybody else, but they're not using any words that you'd be familiar with, and they've just put them into the situation and the world and the fantasy world that they've created. So that's just down to the individual author and their taste, and readers will either get on board with it or they won't. It really is down to each person, and you can't predict what they're going to do, so all you can try and do is go with what you are comfortable with. Another aspect of swearing is unexpected swearing. For example, if you hit your hand with a hammer, you're going to swear. It's appropriate, it's natural, it's common. But there's some situations where you wouldn't have it and it can stand out, and there again it can be used really effectively.
Slam. Ouch. Ouch. Oh, I hit my thumb with a hammer. My thumb's busted open. I'm bleeding. I think the bone's crushed. Ouch.
To shock at a moment that is just not expected. A swear word could be used, or typically sometimes violence can be used at a situation that's even more shocking because it's just so unexpected. So to give you an example, if you think about the Expanse series of books by James S.A. Corey, one of the characters in there, Christian Avasarala, is a politician. Now our politicians on TV and radio, they don't swear. It's because they're trying to be professional, they're trying to maintain some sense of decorum. Whether it's the House of Lords or the Senate, you don't see them swearing. They tend to try and
of Lords.
be professional and present that outwards. So in the Expanse books,
Brutal.
it's very surprising to see this character, Avasarala, swearing. She shocks people with it, she uses it as a weapon, it becomes like a rhythm, a part of her natural language. She's very direct, very abrupt, and it's really, really funny, but also quite interesting because you just don't expect it from a character like that. When you ask someone a question, a politician will sort of go around the houses and won't give you a straight answer. But she tends to. That's not to say she can't be cunning or conniving or scheming behind the scenes or pulling strings on other people and manipulating them. She does all of those things. It's part of her job. But she also swears and is very, very direct. So if you've seen the TV series of The Expanse, Avasarala is played by an Iranian actress, Shuri Agdashlu, and she's fantastic. She uses it so...
Sometimes people like pull these names up like that, and I'm like, do you like really know her name? Do you have notes? Like, I would never be able to pull her name up like out of my head like that. I mean, I literally can think exactly who he's talking about. I've seen her in other things, but I would not be, I mean, it's one of those, so many times I don't know actors' names, and I would just never be able to pull them out of my ass like some people do sometimes.
Effectively in the role, and it brought that character to life to me, that when I've gone back and continued reading the books, I can hear her voice in my head because it's so distinct, her voice. It's a kind of raspy, chocolatey, warm voice, and it's absolutely fantastic. And again, it works because it's unexpected, but it's really, really good. And not every character in the book swears all the time. That's a part of her personality. That's a part of how she is with people. Some of the other characters never swear at all. It just isn't appropriate, or they don't need to, where she feels the need to, and other people won't give her a direct answer, and she'll just cut straight through, shocking them, expecting them for her to be just sort of very indirect, but she doesn't have time. She doesn't want to waste time. She wants to get to the heart of the matter. The last thing I was going to talk about is that swearing can be used to inform the history of your world. As I touched on earlier, some of our swear words have come from historic use and we didn't use them up to a certain point. But you could bring an extra layer into your world by doing something like that. So instead of having just the word God or naming a particular God, you could be swearing about a particular character. And if it keeps coming up, you start to think, well, that person must have been important, must have been relevant. Maybe the stories were passed down from generation to generation if it's an individual. So, I don't know, let's just say the character was called Hercules and you kept swearing about Hercules. Oh, for Hercules' sake, or this, that, and the other. And you're thinking, okay, well, who's this character? Who is he? Where is he? Why is he important? And it must be important if people keep using it. It must have done something really, really awful, really, really important, really, really special, or really memorable that people keep using the name and using the word. So it's another way to bring an aspect of something to your world building that without just sort of writing paragraphs about it. People keep using a name or a phrase, or they mention something. It adds just a little bit another dimension to your work, which can be really quite useful, because then it saves you having to have loads of explanations about something. So I would say use swearing in your books if you feel comfortable, if it's appropriate, and it's useful and informs the situation or the world or the characters in some way. It can be used to add an aspect to a particular character or set of characters, depending upon their background. But really, it comes down to your own personal comfort level. There are ways around using more traditional and familiar swear words, as I've touched on, but ultimately, it's your decision. So get some opinions, whatever you do, whatever you've written, however you used adult language, and see what others think about it before you go forward. So that's all I'll talk about for today. I'll be back soon.
All right, thank you. So I would just add on to that, basically saying that I definitely agree in the sense that, use what you're comfortable with. If that means that you need to make up the words, then do that. I just think that's not, like, if you're saying I don't swear in my books, but then you make up swear words, I think that you are swearing. But if you are of the mind of like, well, I don't want to use like our swear words because like, the words would come up differently in their history. That's different. So that's totally fine. But yeah, making it impactful, making it serve the plot as well, right? That's another thing too. Having characters, knowing that certain characters are not going to swear, knowing that certain characters swear a lot, swear very little, kind of thing, right? That's important to really have that distinction. Every single person in your book swears all the time. It's going to become very monotonous and very samey, right? It's going to become very much like, okay, this is just their writing style, basically. Even though this is supposed to be someone's dialogue, this is just their writing style. This is how they think dialogue goes. So be mindful of that. Everything that you do in your book needs to be mindful, needs to be purposeful, need to have reasons for them. Everything needs to serve the plot, serve the story, and that goes for dialogue. And swearing is a part of dialogue. So I enjoyed that video. Let's move on to the next one. And let's see. This one's 12 minutes. You know what? I think I'm actually going to call it there. So we're going to stop the stream here, and then we are going to upload these to YouTube, and we'll get to more videos next time. Thanks for coming around. Happy writing.